Group 4, we are going to start by discussing one of the reading questions, which was describe the importance of assessment to differentiated instruction.
I can start. I think that assessment drives differentiated instruction. I think that in order to be able to differentiate in the classroom, that teachers need to use the assessment data that they're collecting to help pick out groups, figure out what content needs to be taught. And I don't think the assessment necessarily has to be summative assessments. It could be formative assessments. It could be quick check-ins with the kids, but that's what you use to drive your differentiation. I would say that, and I really like your point about how I was going to ask you that it can be formative. It doesn't have to be a summative assessment that then makes differentiation groups or levels or however we want to organize it or use words. That formative assessment is probably more crucial, I think, towards that summative assessment because then we're getting them in the learning rather than after the learning.
I think those are really good points. I totally agree. And I think the assessment itself is a little bit different too, and maybe it's a little more diagnostic rather than sort of all-encompassing of just a regurgitation of what's being learned. It's more of it's an ongoing, again, both for the instructor and the students, so that part of the assessment is feedback along the way, which I think is quite different than the non-DI classroom where you may not get feedback for weeks until you've had a test. And I think that helps obviously both the student and I think it helps the teacher to help them continue to modify the class, because I think in DI, and I think the text sort of mentioned this, was that the teacher's never comfortable with where the class is in true differentiation because there's always something to improve or to try.
And the text also mentioned how the teacher has to be very flexible, and I feel like formative assessments allows the teacher to be flexible because you get the quick feedback and you can decide, well, this group needs to go faster, this group needs slower, or, it allows you to be flexible, I think.
So it sounds like we agree that it is pretty much one of the most important things about DI.
Yes.
that makes it good. Okay.
So the other important thing, which was the next question we were going to discuss, was comparing the needs of advanced and struggling learners, since that's kind of the key part of differentiation. What did you guys think about comparing the needs of advanced and struggling learners?
I was at actually a professional development today. In a lot of ways, I think they're somewhat similar. I think it's the level of skill. People need scaffolding. We need scaffolding maybe to get up to the standard for that struggling. We need scaffolding to push yourself beyond that standard. I can think about being like an advanced learner. Not always. My students who are advanced learners, do they want to push themselves? But if they have that scaffolding there, they will, just like a struggling learner can't succeed up to that level. I think they both require scaffolding on the part of the teacher in order to be as successful as they can be. I think along with scaffolding, I think you have to take into perspective motivation. Kids who are struggling learners oftentimes have little motivation because it's too difficult and it's too hard and they're obviously struggling, just like your high flyers and your gifted and talented, they often lack motivation too, because for them it's too easy. And so I think you need to be really careful on that. You are challenging them and motivating them at the same time. If you really want their achievement level to increase, they've got to be motivated, and differentiated instruction helps you do that, and they both need it. So that's kind of how I compare the two.
Yeah, I've struggled with that in my intro computer science class, like exactly what you were saying, Allison. There are kids in there who are like AP level, they're bored by the stuff I'm doing, and then I have kids who can't even handle the stuff that I have going on, and it's really tough to try and get all of them to be engaged when they're all at different levels.
I was sort of thrown back by how similar it looks like the needs of advanced learners and struggling learners are. For example, development of study and coping skills. I think that is true of potentially both groups of students. And the fact that, teaching, what the author called teaching up, or teach up, could apply to both groups equally well. And, see with the eyes of love too. I mean, we tend to think of potentially advanced learners as being those who are more privileged at times. I mean, that seems like those things tend to go hand in hand as far as our perception. But I think that that's a false assumption, and that those who do well may also have issues with anger and other emotional and household problems that are sort of masked by their success. And so, I think that both of these groups can a lot of times be handled very similarly, even though they are doing very different things in the class. That's hard to explain, I guess.
Okay, so our first question is from Bonner. Are there certain subjects where differentiation shows more promise, or does it work equally well across subjects?
And I guess I asked this question because I'm not a teacher, and so I don't have direct experience in trying these things in classes or different subjects, and so I would sort of defer to the teachers in the room as far as what their opinions might be on the efficacy of DI in what they teach, what you teach.
I think differentiated instruction lends itself really well to social studies in particular, anything that you're reading. I think it's really easy to kind of differentiate. So I don't necessarily think it's the subject. Sometimes I think it's the grade level more so that you're teaching, where I think younger levels like elementary, I think there's a lot more resources out there for different subject areas. And then when you get into higher level in your content, I think that's when it becomes more difficult. So not necessarily subject, but more grade level for resources.
And I guess I would add to that, I think if every class can be differentiated in English, you touched on reading. I mean, I'm thinking UCLA, Wildlife News Source, that differentiates the questions. I mean, it's there, they'll give probably text. I also think sometimes it becomes more difficult because of the time management on the teacher's end. But as a, is it difficult? Can it not be done? No, I think any content that I think any grade can be done. It's just got to be a choice. And that choice is you can even live. And I think the book kind of discusses like that. You just can't kind of do it. Some of the time you need to go for it.
And the book kind of splits differentiation into 3 different things, right? And one of them is you can change the way they present or assess what they've learned. And I mean, in a math class, you're show me you know how to do the problem. Sometimes you can differentiate that, but sometimes it's just you have to show me you know how to do it. But you can differentiate, I don't know, there's always more than one way to solve a problem, especially in geometry or when you get into calc. There's more than one way to explain something. And there's lots of different ways that we can kind of have kids work together. It doesn't have to just be do these problems to practice and then you're going to do a problem like it on the test. Okay, so our next question is Allison's. What's your biggest challenge for you in differentiating in your classroom? I kind of mentioned this already. My biggest problem is that intro class where I've got AP level kids and really at-risk kids, and I can think of things for each of them to do. I can think of ways to challenge them and ways to kind of bring those kids up, but doing it discreetly is tough. I've been struggling with that.
I would agree with your idea there. The discreetly or the
Ms. Tomlinson mentioned about the waves of how groups interact. Doing work individually and then splitting into small groups and then doing work as an entire class. I know that DI is not chaos in the classroom, but I just get this vision in my head that you're spending a lot of time in the room just moving around, trying to set up these different groups for various reasons that, man, in a 30-35 minute class, that can be a major distraction from what's actually to be taught. But maybe it just gets better with practice. I don't know.
I think we'll all find that out.
And I have the same challenges that you all mentioned. So doing it discreetly, figuring out time management, classroom management, just trying to structure it all. And I have these great visions in my mind of what I want to do, but when I actually think about implementing them in my classroom, I just draw an absolute blank at where to even start or where I go next. So hopefully this course will help me fill in some of those blanks and so that I can become more comfortable with it.
Okay, Beth's question. How does the teacher ensure all CCSS are addressed at grade level when differentiating?
That's a great question. And I don't know how this obviously you're teaching the same material that you need to teach if you were doing DI. So I think from that aspect it should be covered, but the assessment part of that might look different than a Scantron or whatever the common testing method is. So it might put more of the onus on the teacher to be able to figure out how those two mesh. The old school way, that's the recognized way, or between that and the new method of teaching, how to sort of coordinate those things so that it means something to the rest of the world.
And I feel like this is just something as we dig more into or learn more about how to address all standards with differentiation. I don't know.
I think of kind of working backwards and kind of thinking of backwards design and looking at what do you need to have in there and then working back how are you going to get to that, if that kind of makes sense. I feel like that's a good way to maybe think about it. And that's what I do with the state standards. I take a look at, okay, what do I need every kid to know, and so now I'm going to back up and how am I going to get student A there, how am I going to get student X there. So maybe a little bit of a backwards design model.
So we have a little bit under a minute, but our last question we kind of talked about, how do you adjust the nature of an assignment discreetly? And I think we kind of mentioned that we don't know how to do that yet. Right? So hopefully that's one of the things we learn.